So the first thing I want to dive into is this documentary. I want to show this to everybody because everyone's not on Twitter. If you just give me a second here. Okay. I noticed you shared this on Twitter. For everyone who's not aware, Max Blumenthal posted this, my new documentary, Atrocity Inc., How Israel Sells Its Destruction of Gaza. And you listed that it was premiering in the link below. I want to talk about a little bit about this documentary here because it's not the first documentary that you've made about Israel, but I want to dive into how it sells that destruction of Gaza, because one of the things I think a lot of us has noticed is that it does have that support from corporate media.
Yeah, I mean, it's sold. This is like a historical film at this point. They don't need to do any more salesmanship. They sold it on corporate media. And now do you see, Israel is at the most grisly phase of the war, as if you thought it couldn't get any worse and more horrifying. They're ethnically cleansing areas in order to remove all people from Jabalia refugee camp. Probably they'll destroy all of Jabalia and Beit Lahia if they're allowed to get away with it. These are the northernmost areas. Something like 250,000 people or more live there. They're trying to force them all out through terror, bombardment, mass kidnapping. The images coming out of Jabalia look like the Holocaust. It's the most visually documented ethnic cleansing / genocide operation ever, without a doubt, because of the advent of social media and the proliferation of cell phones in Gaza. And our media is not covering it. But they were covering this issue every day after October 7th because Jews were killed. And as the most famous Palestinian poet and man of letters, Mahmoud Darwish, said in an interview with a French Jewish actress, the only reason that history cares about the Palestinians is because we were placed into confrontation with Jews, and Jews exist at the center of the history of the West because of the Holocaust and so much else. And so after Jews were attacked, specifically Jewish Israelis, CNN deploys its most ardently Zionist figures, Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, Wolf Blitzer, who is a former researcher for AIPAC, and they implement what's known as the CNN effect. For those not familiar with this, the term was coined by my friend Pierce Robinson in 1999 in an essay about the selling of the Yugoslavia war by NATO, the destruction of Yugoslavia as a state. And there were real massacres there. But through the continuous repetition of atrocities, both real, exaggerated, and invented, and the freezing out of the quote-unquote enemy narrative, the narrative of the Serbians, the Western public was galvanized in support of NATO's operations. And this is a liberal interventionist blueprint for regime change. It comes from the Democrats. Israel's employing a liberal humanitarian interventionist tactic after October 7th to shock the Western public, and specifically the American public, into supporting what it has always wanted to do, and which it needed to do since 1948 in order to complete the process and consolidate the Zionist colonial project, which is to destroy all resistance and destroy the Palestinians as a people, end the refugee question. We can talk about how this is all playing out now. And they did it not by just playing the footage, thousands of hours of footage of what took place on October 7th, in which, yes, people were shot, civilians were shot by Hamas militants. There's footage of that. But by fabricating atrocities to such an absurd degree that the Western public was conditioned to believe that Hamas was even worse than ISIS and Nazi Germany, and that Israel, therefore, not just had the right, but the obligation to do whatever was necessary to prevent October 7th from happening ever again. In other words, genocide. And that took the form of first lies about 40 beheaded babies rolled out on CNN, then all sorts of fabricated atrocities about families being chopped to pieces, babies being killed in various ways, a fetus being cut from her mother's womb, all invented by figures like Yossi Landau, who's a central character in my film, who comes from a group called Zaka that was in the kibbutzim, or communities that were attacked in southern Israel days after October 7th, and made up all these stories in order to fundraise for his organization, which made millions off of October 7th tall tales. Then they went straight into the mouth of Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, as he explained to the Senate on October 31st why there could not be a ceasefire with Hamas, and Israel's operations, which had already destroyed much of northern Gaza, had to continue. He repeated fake stories from Yossi Landau. The fake stories were repeated by Joe Biden. And then as the public started to turn against this brutal assault, and we started debunking a lot of these lies, and the Palestine Solidarity Movement really got on its feet, and we started seeing encampments spread on college campuses all across the country, Israel started to feel like it was on the back foot. It spun out the ultimate propaganda hoax about mass rape or mass sexual assault carried out in systemic fashion by Hamas militants with orders to assault women on October 7th. And, you know, I show how we debunked it at the Gray Zone, and other independent outlets did so, and how the media worked hand in glove with Israel to spin out these lies without ever questioning what they were being fed, setting themselves up for complete humiliation, as we saw with the New York Times. So this film is about Israel's successful marketing of a genocide through the corporate media. And ultimately, at the end, I point the finger at corporate media figures who sold the Holocaust of our time. And because I believe that they're culpable, that they have blood on their hands. Yeah. And, you know, we can talk about specific figures. And this all takes place within the course of about 47 minutes. So I couldn't run through every lie and debunk everything. But I think what we did here with Propaganda and Company and my co-director, Sut Jali, who also made an excellent film called The Occupation of the American Mind that everyone should watch, about the Israel lobby. What we did is we provided everyone with a free teaching tool. You can go into your community and show it to people who are on the fence or might not understand exactly what happened after October 7th, on October 7th. And, you know, I think we succeeded with that. Last night in DC, we showed this film at Busboys and Poets, restaurant, cafe, and it was a packed house. So it's definitely getting around, and people are, after over a year of genocide, people are not exhausted. You can just still feel the righteous anger about what took place.
That's right. It's very well done. I watched it a couple of days ago. I highly recommend everybody else check it out. And speaking of media figures, or I guess I kind of consider him to be a media figure, even though he's not like technically a commentator. He's a pollster, but one of the individuals that's mentioned in this documentary is Frank Luntz.
Frank Luntz, yeah.
Yeah, pollster. You guys have seen me show some of his clips on the show before. You mentioned him, and I didn't even think about this at that point in time. I was mainly focused on the commentators on corporate media. I didn't realize what he did. So I'd like for you to get into a little bit about that, about a poll that he conducted that also was pretty biased towards Israel.
Yeah, I mean, it's after we were concluding our decimation of the mass rape hoax. I got a tip, and I didn't exactly know what the source had for me, but they said that they had been attending these seminars that had been held in New York that were based on focus groups held by Frank Luntz, in which New York legislators and influencers were being hosted. And basically, Israel lobby groups were helping them make the case for what Israel was doing for Gaza. And they conducted these focus groups based on basically the people who were participants in the focus groups that Frank Luntz specializes in were asked questions like, what would be the worst crime Hamas could be guilty of? Extermination, slaughter, kidnapping, torture, and then rape was one of the questions. And so this slide really stuck out to me because it was a slide presented to influential people in New York politics, telling them basically accuse Hamas of rape because this is the most effective way of demonizing this group in order to justify Israel's assault on Gaza, which we consider a genocide. And so I realized, I put two and two together, and I said, this is why they started this whole hoax and started putting this together. They actually did focus groups. They actually did the equivalent of market research before they came up with a new hoax. I mean, of course. And I have the details here. I have the literal slide. So I published a piece about it at the Gray Zone, and I cover this in Atrocity Incorporated. How, I mean, it's almost so cynical that you can't believe it, that a foreign apartheid state activates its lobby and its paid pollsters who get millions of dollars to determine what to accuse the enemy of, even though they don't have the facts to support it. And then they go to the UN and all their media assets and do it. And to this point, I would say the majority of the American public, if they were polled, probably believes that Hamas committed rape on a mass scale on October 7th because it's repeated so much. It is still repeated to this day by Kamala Harris. Every time she talks about October 7th, she repeats this fraud, this hoax, including in Detroit in a recent rally. I mean, in Detroit, of all places, she repeated it. And she said the worst crime was October 7th. So Frank Luntz has done it again. This is someone who has a long record of experience with the Israel lobby in helping them shape their various propaganda constructs and the language and talking points they use in arguments, all the way down to the campus level. Like campus activists for Israel are presented with his studies and recommendations. And I've had them get up when I've done talks on various campuses and basically and literally read from his handbook.
I didn't know that about him. I just thought this was a pollster who came around during election season that so watching that documentary really woke me up about that. I was like, I didn't know this guy was, in deep with the Israeli lobby. It's interesting what you find out when you start to dig a little bit deeper. But one of the things I noticed too, the repetition, right? Because one of the things that they'll teach you is that repetition is effective. And I think that's why we continue to see people like Kamala Harris continue to say it over and over.
Yeah, I mean, she hits her talking points. Like everyone, her opponents say she's dumb, and that's not the issue with her. Like she's very good at like a kind of very mechanical, robotic, legally trained, someone who's very well trained in the courtroom. She can advance arguments that she's been prepared for. But there's no depth there. There's no critical thinking. And that's the perfect person they want out front, because she will advance an argument that has been debunked again and again without ever investigating or questioning, simply because it's been market tested. So effectively, the Democrats are using Frank Luntz's polling data as well. When she says Hamas committed mass rape, they're reaching for what they think is the most effective talking point. And this talking point and propaganda construct were created for specifically liberal white women who comprise the base of the contemporary Democratic Party and Kamala's support. The Israelis launched a hashtag to go with it when they launched this fraud in late November, Believe Israeli Women, based on the Me Too moment where we were supposed to believe all women. But we can't believe Israeli women because they're Israeli. And we know that when Israeli Zionists are speaking in public, they're probably lying. So feminist organizations actually took a step back from this one because they were so horrified by what they were seeing in Gaza, especially their younger members, their younger constituents. I know Planned Parenthood's younger members are very opposed to the genocide. So, but Kamala, she's heavily supported by the boomer generation, older women, as well as liberal Zionist women. So that talking point is for them, but it comes from a Republican pollster, Frank Luntz. By the way, I met him once. I interviewed him in his apartment for a documentary, and the interview didn't really fit, so it never made the cut. But all over his walls were newspaper clippings of victories by Israeli national politicians, prime ministers that he actually consulted for, that he was working for. That's one of his proudest pieces of his legacy, is working for foreign politicians in Israel. And these guys are the Democrats, Republicans. The consultant class is full of people who have worked in Israel. That's where some of the most lucrative contracts come from. A lot of the people who helped get Obama elected went to work in Israel for Netanyahu's opponents.
Wow. Interesting. I'm finding out a lot tonight. Like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. One of the things I want to show you too, actually, I think you probably already saw this, but the viewers probably haven't seen this. Speaking of the media, I want to get your take on this clip here from CNN between Mehdi Hassan and this other gentleman here who apparently goes off on him very quickly, just to show people what is happening here. Now, to be clear, after this episode, CNN, Abby Phillips, she did come forward and issue some type of apology or whatever. But the reality is what this gentleman here says to Mehdi Hassan is no different than what I've seen on CNN and MSNBC and corporate media when they're referring to Muslims, Muslim voters, the Palestinian people. Everyone, listen to this really quick. And Max, I want to get your take on this.
If you don't want to be called Nazis, stop doing
it.
You've been
called an anti-Semite more than anyone else's table.
Yeah.
And people will sit there and, no, by me. I never called you an anti-Semite. Okay. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying
I'm a supporter of the Palestinians, so I'm used to it.
Yeah, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. The thing is that
you just say I should die?
You should not.
No,
did you just say I should be killed?
No, I did not say that. No, I did not say that.
Hold on.
Did your guest just say I should be killed on live TV?
I said I hope you
don't. Let me just stop.
You said you hope my beeper doesn't go off.
Because you said I'm a big supporter
of the Palestinians.
Of Hamas.
Guys, let me stop.
Palestinians.
Are you?
Am I what? No, of course I'm not.
I apologize.
Are you a racist, violent person inciting violence against
Ryan,
That's
disgusting. That is completely.
No, I apologize.
Good job, CNN. Let's have first block say the Muslim guy should be blown up.
I apologize.
On TV.
Don't say then I apologize. You literally.
I thought you said Hamas.
You didn't think I said Hamas. I said I supported Palestinian rights.
Yes, I did.
Why? Because when you hear
what's funny is Rudy Giuliani said this yesterday, so you're a great guest to be here to defend Rudy Giuliani.
I wasn't going to entertain nonsense today, and so at this point,
this is what we're in now. This is America in 2024.
Here's what I will say.
Forget the racism.
That's right.
I should die.
I didn't say that. You
said, what does beeper mean? Don't give me your fake ignorance.
I did not say you should die.
Why did you say with my beeper go off?
What did you mean?
What did you mean by the beeper? What did you mean by the beeper? No, you didn't. You said, I hope your beeper doesn't go off.
Ryan, stop talking.
At least have the guts to support your racist comment.
Hang on. I'm so sorry. Let her bring it back. This is why yesterday's rally was disgusting.
Don't call us Nazis, but I'm going to threaten the brown guy as a terrorist and kill him.
Because I didn't ever say Donald Trump was Hitler. Man. But do you know who stood on a stage yesterday and said, I want to come to the Nazi rally? I don't have to make up words and call you something. You're saying it for yourself. And what you just said right here, apologize, but I will tell you, I don't accept that apology, and you didn't even say it to me.
I didn't say
that was disgusting. But I can be offended when you don't even say it to me. I'm not Puerto Rican, but I was offended by what he said yesterday. And I'm offended that the former president and potentially future president would allow it and go for 12 hours and not say, I don't care. Because you know what? When Kamala Harris put out statements about switching of opinions, it wasn't good enough for Republicans.
Why are you looking at me?
Because you said it.
Why don't you take this?
And then they go into the Trump rally thing. But the part I wanted to focus on is that dialogue there between Mehdi Hassan and the other gentleman there who issued an apology and then went back on Twitter and said the exact opposite. What I want to hear from you, Max, is why do you think, and in particular, Mehdi Hassan, who drives me crazy because sometimes he can be really good on an issue, but then at the same time, he just wants to do similar what Robert Reich does, which is continue to simp for the status quo and the establishment. Why do you think Mehdi Hassan is continuing to put up with that type of behavior? The very same people that he's sitting at the table with while that gentleman was telling him, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. I think we all know what that means. why is he still trying to hold water for these establishments and for like the Democratic Party, number one? And number two, how did you feel about that discussion that took place on CNN?
Well, that was so cringeworthy on so many levels. And I agree with what you said leading into it. But that's why you're looking at the reason why Mehdi Hasan has been simping for and plumping for Kamala Harris and the Democrats. First of all, he's British. I don't think he's even American. I don't even know if he's an American citizen. But he came to Washington from this crappy little island that, would never get, that has caused so much harm around the world. For people like in the media, it's like you're just trapped in this little island and you're separated from the world. And when you come to America, it's like you've hit the big time. If you're in England, if you're in London. And also it's so much freer here. Like the discussion is so much freer. Look at all of the interrogations, raids that are taking place on independent media figures there. I mean, it's just so small and tightly compressed. So Mehdi comes to Washington. He's working for Al Jazeera, but he really wants to hit the big time. And the way to do that is he decides, and it's natural for him. He's a British Muslim. The Republicans aren't going to accept him. He tried to get accepted by Rupert Murdoch's Daily Mail and pitched a column to them where in a leaked letter, he said that he would attack the left from within the left because he's socially conservative. And actually before that, video leaked of him as a kind of Muslim hate preacher delivering a tirade in a mosque where he said that Yazid, who is sort of like the Shia devil, is a homosexual music lover. And, he totally reinvents himself in Washington as a liberal who is a darling of the Democrats. He's obviously a very talented communicator. And people love British accents in Washington. They take you so much more seriously. So he actually manages to get a show on MSNBC's Peacock cutout. It wasn't very well rated, but he gets in with the Beltway inner circle of the Democrats as a British Muslim. It's kind of unheard of. And it does speak to a certain level of talent, but also cunning and conniving on his part to do that. And he has to walk the line because he has all these fans, and I guess he has some conviction. He believes in the Palestinians. He has to walk the line between supporting Palestinians and being ingratiating himself with a political party that is anti-Palestinian, pro-war, welcomes Liz Cheney more than they would welcome someone like Mehdi Hasan. And so we can see the delicate balance that he tries to entertain on Twitter when he's arguing with Palestinians all the time who say that it's disgusting that they would ever be expected to vote for the author of the Holocaust that is claiming the lives of their families. He's also not Palestinian. He's of, I believe, Pakistani descent. And he's just going forward with this. It doesn't make any sense. He's asking the Muslims and Arabs to strip themselves of their dignity and go to the polls for Kamala. Why is he doing this? It's because if he doesn't do this after being fired for MSNBC after October 7th, or being let go because he was too pro-Palestinian, I guess, he won't get back on those CNN panels and he will disappear and possibly, I don't know, have to go back to his island across the Atlantic, the former colonial media power, England. Nobody wants to do that. It's dreary. The weather's bad. And here, this panel worked out so perfectly for him. And he does a really good job of getting under people's skin. Like he recently had a confrontation with Sarah Palin where she starts calling him obnoxious because he won't let her speak. And then he said, "You're calling me obnoxious? You're a racist." Which isn't, I think, like that's like an escalation. And then he just starts pouncing on her, but he is obnoxious. He did the same thing to Noam Chomsky in an interview. Noam Chomsky, who was like approaching 90, just jumping down his throat, not letting him speak. Slavoj Žižek, he wouldn't let him talk. I mean, I don't agree with Žižek, and a lot of what he says is clownish, but Mehdi, he never lets anyone talk. And so he gets on people's nerves, and he got this guy, Ryan Gerdersky, who's just like some conservative incorporated clown to bring out his inner racist, his inner Zionist, and a conversation that had nothing to do with Israel, Palestine, or Lebanon. It worked out perfectly for Mehdi. Everyone's talking about it. He's back on TV. He's back on the A-Team. His network that he started, Zeteo, which impersonates an independent outlet, is going to flourish as a result of this. And if Kamala wins, he is going to get at least B-list, if not A-list. I mean, A-list would be Kamala herself, but he's going to get people from the administration on his Zeteo interviews, which will give him more influence than we would enjoy as outsiders who are like refusing to support the two parties. And so the contradictions are impossible to square between supporting the rights of Palestinians and simping for Kamala. But that's not the point. The point is he just wants to get back on TV, get the big time guests, remain in the Beltway, and keep this meteoric rise to influence and stardom going. And so basically I am saying that, yes, he is an opportunist and a careerist like most people who come to Washington, where I grew up. And he does have some convictions. He's definitely talented. But people, I mean, that's why he's making this case for Kamala. It relates to him and his own ambitions, and it's working out very well. And just notice, he wasn't talking about Palestine before the Republican Zionist dweeb guy brought up the pager attack by Israel in Lebanon. That's not why he was there on that panel. He was just there to echo Democratic Party talking points, saying the same things every other resistance figure, former Biden staffer, was saying on that panel. There was nothing that he was saying that was particularly unique. He wasn't using that platform to challenge the Zionist consensus at CNN. And that's what he's going to do when he's on there.
What do you mean by, like, when you said Zeteo impersonates an independent outlet?
Yeah, I mean, look at the studio. Like, no independent outlet has a studio that nice. It looks like a professional broadcast studio. You know, then they'll have contributors attacking Israeli propaganda, and then he'll be hosting people who are like bogus saccharine celebrity influencers who are backing Kamala. And you know, it's the same model that he embraced at MSNBC. And you're seeing this take place to some degree on the left, but it's more of a model that's taken root on the right, the mainstream alternative media model, you know, where billionaires are backing figures to echo and parrot the narratives that come out of alternative media on the right. It's like the narratives about COVID and the globalists and so on. But they have fancy studios, and they're all in the tank for Trump now, and they're not alternative in any way.
Yeah, I don't think everyone realizes just how much it costs to have like a studio like that. I mean, I don't have a studio, obviously. You guys can tell, but it's expensive. Like, those desks are expensive. To not have to have a microphone in front of you, that means that the studio is mic'd up. That's expensive. You have to have an audio engineer. Like, all these things are like, it costs a lot of money, and that money has to come from somewhere. Plus, IMAX, like, I've been kind of skeptical of some of the people that were commentators on corporate media that all of a sudden over the past 2 years, they're like, I'm independent. Like, you know, like Chris Cuomo and like Mehdi Hasan and all of them. I've been kind of skeptical, and I'm just like, are you really independent, or are you just kind of trying to ride this wave of, look at me, I'm free from corporate media, but their talking points still sound like corporate media?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's so obvious who's real and who's not. This has been, since October 7th, we've undergone the ultimate mask off moment. And honestly, I mean, Palestine is kind of easy. It's something to unite around for people who might have disagreed on the Syria dirty war, Ukraine, and so many other issues, COVID. But this one's it's just so obvious that, you know, if you're not standing with Palestinians as they're facing genocide, you're you're evil. There's no other way to say it. So looking past that, where did Mehdi stand on Syria? He is Shia, by the way. He was supporting the dirty war, attacking Seymour Hersh when he would come out with pieces exposing how the Duma chemical attack was a staged incident, attacking everyone who questioned this and putting forward the case for bombing the crap out of Syria. And he, supported the Ukraine proxy war on COVID. He was as big a fanatic as Anthony Fauci, attacking anyone who questioned it and all the damage that was done to America and particularly to inner cities in America. He was taking the hardest line for the Democrats. And so he comes in on Palestine, and a lot of other people are. Chris Hayes, for example, he's able to say a few things on Palestine that are humane and important to say at a certain moment. But at the end of the day, they're supporting the same program, the same political program internationally and financially, the same Western financial program that is behind the genocide, that is responsible for the genocide in Palestine. And they'll go back to it once there's a ceasefire. I mean, do we honestly think that a world in which the United States maintains hegemony is going to be good for the Palestinians? No, but that's the world that a lot of these, a lot of fake independent commentators are defending. There are all these boutique left magazines that have shiny covers, and they somehow actually manage to produce magazines. The best left-wing writers want to write for them, like dissent. And I mean, nobody reads them, but like they have budgets, and it's a way to get credibility. It's really like the respectable left, N+1, dissent. There's this magazine I saw called Lux by this former Intercept columnist who's supposed to be real hip, Natasha Leonard, who used to attack me for various anti-war positions, but claims to be an anarchist. They all recently gathered in London for a meeting with the new leaders of the Open Society Foundations of George Soros, which was passed on to his son, Alex Soros. And they're all, the Open Society Foundations is doling out grants to these small leftist magazines. I mean, and when I say leftist, like on social issues, they are as leftist as it gets. But on supporting Western hegemony, they always take the same line that Soros has taken. Soros, who was described in a 1991 Washington Post article by David Ignatius as an overt operator doing what the CIA used to do covertly in funding color revolutions, funding regime change. And so that's kind of like, I think, the difference between true alternative media or independent left media like yourself and the ones who could work in corporate media, sometimes get fired for taking the wrong position on Palestine, but are always trying to edge their way back in and exist at the left edge of the conventional opinions set by the Democratic Party establishment, is that they fundamentally support the underpinnings, the ideological and political underpinnings of Western empire. And we do not, which puts us out in the political wilderness and leaves us constantly searching for the right third-party candidate who's scrounging for 1% of the vote. That's the way that, I mean, we're in some ways, we're sort of like internal casualties of an empire. But at the same time, I think we have more grassroots reach than ever before, which is why you see people impersonating the aesthetic.
Yeah. Yeah. Try to make it look like, look, I'm just in my house. This isn't like a studio or anything. So Max, we did talk about what happened to Jeremy when he was arrested in Israel. And it made me wonder about some things. And David K just brought up a good question. He said, I worry for Max's safety. Be careful, Max. You've made a lot of powerful enemies who hate your honesty and the reach of your message. Do you ever worry, Max? Do you ever get concerned that you may be a target the way that I know Jeremy was in Israel, but do you ever get concerned that you may be a target?
Well, I was just randomly going through Facebook messages on the Gray Zone's Facebook page, which we just stopped dealing with because the suppression, the censorship on Facebook was so extreme that we couldn't reach anyone there. So I checked it for the first time in a while, and I had a message from some random Israeli who said, Jeremy needs to leave Israel immediately. And then they later wrote and said, Jeremy is an enemy. If I find him, I will act accordingly. He puts my family and friends at great risk. And Jeremy, I sent it to Jeremy, and he said, well, he's been receiving these messages from Israelis through his own Twitter account and through his own Facebook account. So they heard about him in the media, and they started putting out the word that he was in the country and that they should go neutralize him. And this is a country of, 5 to 6 million Jewish Israelis. A large percentage of them have bodies like are killers. I mean, that's a country that could probably defeat a European country with a much larger population in a war in a few days with all the US weapons it has. And it's just a population that has a disproportionate percentage of highly trained killers and psychopaths who run over scores of people at once in bulldozers in Gaza, as we've seen, blow up their houses for fun. So Jeremy was definitely at risk there. And he was accused by the Israeli police at certain points of being a deep Iranian spy.
Of course.
Which, imagine being in his position. He was held in solitary confinement. They're accusing him of spying. He gets out and people are threatening him. So that was a terrifying scenario. We're really grateful he's out, and for everyone who supported him, including his former boss, RFK Jr., who came through. A lot of other people didn't. So for all the criticism I've had of him, we're really grateful. I think it made a difference. From where I sit, I can't be looking over my shoulder all the time. I faced character assassination. And I think in this era, character assassination is much more effective than it was in the past. It's why we don't see the physical assassination of as many political leaders, national leaders, as we used to in this country in the 60s and early 70s. The assassination attempts on Donald Trump were honestly unexpected, and it shows how he's sort of crossed a line where the character attacks, the lawsuits, the lawfare didn't work. Something's going on. As for myself, look at our Wikipedia page at the Gray Zone. Look at my Wikipedia page. It's a form of a digital assassination. And the point is to isolate me from polite society, to make sure that no mainstream publication will ever publish me again, to ruin my career, make it uncomfortable for me to even go to like a college reunion, things like that. And if that fails and I start to achieve greater influence than I already have, then, perhaps I should worry. But I think that's the position we're in. And honestly, what can you do? What can you do? Another lesson is you can't hide from your fate. You have to decide that this is what you believe in and have the courage of your convictions and go forward. There's as we've seen with so many recent assassinations, there's really nowhere to hide. So you might as well just be out there and let your freak flag fly, as Jimi Hendrix said.
Yeah, it's one of those questions I always wondered. When Katie Halper was here, I was asking her about this too. For people like yourself and Katie Halper and Aaron, speaking truth to power, and you are Jewish, but you're anti-Zionist, do you feel like you get a lot of pushback, in particular from the Jewish community? And when would you say that you first realized that Zionism was problematic and what Israel was doing?
Well, to answer your last question, it was a process I went through, from going on the Free Birthright Israel trip and obviously seeing that I wasn't being told the truth, to paying close attention to the Second Intifada, the destruction of the Jenin refugee camp in 2002, the assault on Lebanon in 2006, and then 2008, 2009, the first major assault on Gaza really shook me up a lot. And getting to know Palestinians in my own society and giving them the time of day. I mean, there was a point when I was younger and I wanted to be like a liberal Zionist, and I would get offended by some of the things they would say. But at a certain point, I decided to humble myself and just listen to what they said and determine for myself if their narrative was correct. And it matched up with the reality that it matched up. And so I embarked on this book project to do this book called Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. I had this book called Republican Gomorrah that was a bestseller because I got on NPR for like 15 minutes on Terry Gross. And if you get on Terry Gross, you automatically get a bestseller, because everyone who listens to that show is a liberal who reads lots of books. And I was telling them about the Republican Party in a refreshing kind of a new way that they didn't understand, and the forces behind it in the George W. Bush era, when it was the Christian right and Christian Zionism that was really animating his administration at every level, including its foreign policy. And yeah, so I had this book success, unexpected, with Nation Books, a small publisher. So I said, I want to do a book about Israel because I'm Jewish and I can get in there and I want to spend a lot of time there and show Americans the real Israel they don't know. But for me, it was also a learning process. Like, I'm going to see what it's like. And I did so over the next 4 or 5 years. I think it took about 3 years to write it, 4 years for it to come out. Came out in 2013. And it felt like I was like running up against a wall with a grenade just to like open a hole in the wall. And the grenade was exploding on me because I was attacked so harshly for that book, but it was a grassroots success without the same promotion. You know, I wasn't going to get on Terry Gross because she's a liberal Zionist. And, you know, I think it succeeded, but that's when I received the harshest attacks, because I wasn't, you know, I still hadn't been fully discredited within the Jewish establishment. I remember sitting with my grandmother one day in her kitchen, and she opened a letter, like, you know, snail mail from one of her friends. And it was one of her friends had cut out an article from the Jewish Daily Forward. The oldest Jewish publication, used to be written in Yiddish. I think it still is. It has a Yiddish edition, but it was an article attacking me, saying like, I'm the most extreme Jewish anti-Zionist that's ever been seen, like crazier than Norman Finkelstein. And she just looked at it and kind of like discarded it. But, you know, it's at that intimate level that you get attacked if you're Jewish. Judge Richard Goldstone, for example, he authored the Goldstone Report for the UN, showing that Israel committed war crimes in its 2008-2009 attack on Gaza. He was prevented from attending his own grandson's bar mitzvah in South Africa. So it's like this very hermetic environment if you're Jewish, especially in a place like South Africa, but even in the US. And you have to be willing to just go forward and be an anti-Zionist because you just believe that's the right thing to do. After that point, the attacks maybe continued for like 2 years, but at this point they're just like, yeah, they think I'm insane, that I can't be reconciled with, and that the only thing to do with me is to try to, demonetize, censor, and continue to tamper with my Wikipedia page. But there's no like engagement or debate. I guess I'd be curious, you know, there's so much pressure right now from the Democratic Party on Black Americans to support Kamala, and on influencers, especially, and celebrities. And whenever I see one of them step out of line, I see them get attacked more harshly, or at least as harshly as I ever was. So I think there's a similarity there, that you're just supposed to be a Democrat no matter what they do. So I don't know if you've experienced some of the same things, but
Absolutely. I've been attacked relentlessly by Roland Martin. A lot of people are like,
Oh,
why
yeah.
is this guy coming after you? I was like, it's weird. But relentlessly by people like him, the Kesheev group, also the Black church. That's another one that will come. And it's really weird because I grew up, like I was raised like, in the church. And I remember they taught us similar things, that this is what is supposed to happen, that Israel is supposed to have all of the land, and they'll tell you that it's biblical. And I always push back that the Bible is open for interpretation. So that wasn't well received. Just so that you know, I didn't like that too much. But yeah, those of us that are not supporting Kamala Harris, like I feel like if you're Black and you're not supporting Kamala Harris, they're heavily attacking us. They're saying, oh, well, then just get Trump then. I'm like, well, actually, I'm voting for Jill Stein. And they're like, oh, well, Jill Stein is a Russian puppet, and how dare you not vote for this Black woman? And it drives me crazy, Max, because I've said this multiple times in my show, and if you look at the research that's been done, I'm like, they're trying to pass off Kamala Harris the same way that Rachel Dolezal was passed off. And just because someone went to Howard doesn't mean that they're a Black American. Anyone can go to Howard.
I know white people who went to Howard.
Exactly.
I'm not saying Kamala's white. Don't get it twisted, but.
No, but it's true. Anybody can go. Like, you don't have, it's not just for Black people, right? And it's just, I'm like, get out of here, man. And they're like, well, she's just like you. I'm like, no, she's not like me. She really isn't. Like, she had a lot of opportunities that a lot of us just did not have. She already had a leg up because of the fact that, and I, don't want to mention badly of people who passed on, but the reality is, when she says her mom was struggled and put money aside, her mom came from a high caste system, Max.
Yeah, she did.
Like, it's not like she came here from a bottom caste system and she really had to struggle hard and stuff. I mean, yeah, as a PhD student, you're going to be limited with how much actual work that you can do to earn money. But she already came in from an upper caste system. And so, no, I'm like, she's not. Stop saying that. She's not like us. And then there's a lot of pushback as well, like from the Boule. And the reality is, even people like me, because I didn't go to HBCU, because I wasn't a AKA, I am looked down upon, even though I went to college, but I didn't go to HBCU.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you weren't networking in the same way.
Right.
And she comes the race is constructed differently in the islands. Like, you have a class of people there who are, when they come to the US, they're just Black, but there they are an elite class that rules over Afro-descendant people in a way that they wouldn't in the United States. And then they could come here and apply for affirmative action, go to a HBCU, and then run for office, and then expect all Black people who had a totally different experience to vote for them or support them. I mean, Obama came from a different island. He came from Hawaii. He was raised by a white woman who was, during the 1960s, working for USAID, a CIA front in Indonesia, at a time when the CIA was running an extermination operation against communists and socialists on the island. Her history is very unusual. Gerald Horne wrote a piece speculating that Obama's biological father may have been involved with the CIA in West Africa. But Obama came to the US with a lot of advantages as well. And he's African and American, but it's a totally different experience. So he had to go to Jeremiah Wright to be legitimized in order to run for office in Chicago, where you have to be legitimized you have to be considered legitimate, like Harold Washington, by Black people. And then he throws Jeremiah Wright under the bus. Someone he was going to have to throw him under the bus because he was pro-Palestine. He was anti-war. He was from the Black liberation tradition of James Cone. Obama needed to cast that off, but he stepped over his back to get where he was. And it's so infuriating now to see him lecture black men on not supporting Kamala, someone who has a very similar background to him. And my sense is that there's this feeling like the feeling that a lot of Jews I know have for years, that we couldn't talk about this. We couldn't talk about Zionism. And somebody just had to come out and just say it and be destroyed. Like Norman Finkelstein was the one who did it. And now some people, you're hearing it, but it's coming from people like Candace Owens, who's coming out on the right.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I feel like on the low are listening to her who are not from the right, because she's just saying forbidden things that a lot of people want to say, that you will be destroyed for saying in public if you are like a progressive. I don't know what you think of that, but that's my take.
No, it's 100% true. And it just, I even go back to Bernie 2020. And I remember even back then, they were trying to tell us that we needed to support Joe Biden. Like this was another, even like the Dem primaries, like the black church was saying, we're going to get behind Joe Biden. I'm like, really? So I'm supposed to get behind Joe Biden too, just because I'm black? I'm not even a part of the church, but that was the order. Like, you guys better get behind Joe Biden. And I'm like, he didn't have any policies like really for the black community. He was running on saving the soul of the nation, whatever that even means.
That was so wild. In South Carolina, had his rallies, they were playing Lift Every Voice and Sing. Like, did he even know what that was? I mean, it was just, how did he pull that off? And let me just qualify. I can't endorse everything Candace Owens is saying about Kamala Harris. I'm just trying to speak to the appeal and the frustration that a lot of people have in the moment, and then no one's speaking to it. But there's going to be a terrible reckoning for the Democrats for what they've done to all the quote unquote minority groups they take for granted, from Arabs to black people, Latinos. I mean, they just take them all for granted. If you think that Donald Trump is getting unprecedented support from these groups, wait till someone comes along who actually really knows how to speak to them, who isn't from the Republican Party and giving tax cuts to billionaires. It just hasn't happened yet.
That's true. Max Blumenthal, thank you so much.
Yeah, great conversation. It's always cathartic. Thanks a lot.